Welcome to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to helping you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most.
Well, hello and welcome to the Money and Meaning Show. My name is Jeff Bernier, and I am delighted that you decided to spend a few minutes with me this afternoon. I'm really excited about today's show. You know, back in 2013, I believe it was, I met a wilderness therapist. She was involved in a wilderness therapy program, and she introduced me to the work of Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey. And she used it in her therapeutic work with these kids, out in the woods. And I was really intrigued by the whole idea. So since that time, I've become a lot more interested in some of Campbell's work, but also storytelling and the power of myth and those kinds of things. And it was interesting. After I learned about Joseph Campbell's work, I started seeing it everywhere. I started recognizing it in movies and in advertisements and in web pages. And it was really impactful to me. And a few weeks ago, I was on a coaching call with a consultant that I work with named Carl Richards, and he had today's guest on. And it turns out today's guest is also very involved and very done a lot of study and work on some of these same themes. As a matter of fact, he wrote a fantastic book that he used a lot of Joseph Campbell's work in the hero's journey in his book. And as soon as I heard this guy talk, I said, I got to get him on the show because some of his experiences, expertise, the things he wrote about in his book would be great for my audience, which are, late career folks who are wondering what's next. And so let me introduce Ben Katt. He's been helping people experience deep transformation and access greater lives of greater joy, compassion, and purpose for over 20 years. His book that I mentioned, The Way Home, Discovering the Hero's Journey to Wholeness and Midlife, is a guidebook and memoir about the inner journey we all must embark on in order to live our fullest lives. Ben is the founder of the Within Prison Meditation Project. He served as a hospice chaplain and writes regularly about identity, purpose, creativity, and belonging in his weekly Still newsletter. He's a certified advanced meditation teacher. He holds a Master of Divinity. He served as an ordained minister for many years. Anyway, he's an expert on adapting ancient personal development practices for modern context to help people wake up to who they are and why they're here. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful, Ben, but welcome aboard.
Thank you, Jeff. So good to be with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us. Like I said, when you were on Carl's workshop, I don't know, it must have been a couple of months ago. When you blink and
time
flies by, and you were just speaking my language. I know you even, I think, quoted Howard Thurman's, famous quote in your book, I think maybe, and as well. And I tried to use some of those themes in my book, The Money and Meaning Journey, in a context of mid to late career individuals who are moving into retirement. And I tried to use some of those ideas, but it was, again, when you shared your journey, and then I got to reading your book, I just said, this is perfect for this audience. So I love to start these really informal. Do you mind just telling us about yourself and your family?
Yeah, so I'm joining you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I grew up in this area and then left when I was about 18, spent some time in Michigan, and eventually landed in the Pacific Northwest in the amazing city of Seattle. We were there 14 years. My wife and I, Cherie, we've been married 22. And we have 3 kids, 3 teenagers, actually. So there's a lot going on in my house, a lot of energy. It's a lot of fun. And, but yeah, in 2020, we moved to Milwaukee from Seattle, in part to be by family for a different pace. And I think probably also deep down, as much as we love the mountains and, the Pacific Northwest is hard to beat, we are also very much Great Lakes people. So we live close to Lake Michigan, and it's cold right now, but I feel like, pretty soon we'll be able to get outside again.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So you've got a pretty varied vocational life or career or careers. You mind sharing a little bit about your career journey? Because I think it's really fascinating, all that you've done and I guess still do.
Yeah.
You mind sharing some of your path?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think about this a lot. So I can definitely describe it. The more there's moments where I look and say, what is all this stuff? Like I've been all over the map, and yet I do see the through line. And I think for most of us, we really can, if we slow down and pay attention, we can start to notice some common themes in our career path. And so for me, there's really three threads that have been woven together the whole time, and it's sort of spirituality, or you could say inner life, and then community and belonging, and social healing, or social or service. Really, how do I serve? What's my purpose? And I see those back when I started a church when I was 27 years old in Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
Church is still there. It's called Awake Church, and I bring up the name in part because I feel like that idea of waking up is really central to what I'm all about. I want to keep waking up, to reality. I want to be fully alive. I want to know who I am. I want to go inward, and I want to figure out why I'm here. What's my contribution? And I want to help others do that as well. I mean, you don't have to look far to see that there's a lot of pain and hurt and brokenness and struggle in the world right now, as there always is. It's just we're so aware of it with social media and all these things. And I believe that our purpose is, we're here to do something about that. So started out as a pastor, transitioned into more coaching in that space with faith communities. And then, since then I've really, the main expression of my work is, I do coaching and help people who are, on their own hero's journey, help them answer the call to adventure that they receive. And I teach meditation, and yes, also have been accompanying people at the end of life for the last few years. So all those things, they call me to be present, to be in the moment. And I can't tell you how much, I actually just was in a prison this morning teaching meditation to a group of 20 women. And I learn so much when I go into those spaces. Yeah.
Wow. And was a lot of this intentional, or is it just your heart pulled you in a direction and it resonated? Maybe it wasn't easy, but you knew you were supposed to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was it intentional plan, or was it more the latter?
It's probably, I've grown in my capacity to feel comfortable stepping into the unknown. So there's a little bit of both. There's a sense of, I mentioned the call to adventure earlier. That's one of Joseph Campbell's main steps. That's really kind of the first thing, is that life as you know it is interrupted. You have your day-to-day, sort of the familiar, and then something happens. And in there's all sorts of ways that's told in movies and myths and things like that. But in our everyday lives, it might be we're going through some transition, or something sudden happens, right? Or maybe we're going through a divorce, or there's an illness. All sorts of different ways things can invite us into that call. And I would say really a pivotal moment was when I was about 10 years ago. I'd been pastoring this church for a while, and I loved it. I really did. I loved the work. It was meaningful, impactful. We had a community center. We were working with folks dealing with addiction, mental illness, who were homeless, and women exploited in prostitution. And I was so into it that I kind of missed the fact that my heart had snuck out the back door. And so one morning I was out on a run in the Seattle rain, and this voice just kind of welled up inside me and said, "If you don't have your heart, you have nothing." Wow. And initially I was like, "Oh, I'm burned out." I started to peel back the layers and saw my obsession with achievement and perfection and performing to please others. And it was in that space, by really investigating that I started to sense my time in that work was over, and that I was evolving into a different space. So, and that would be similar in some of these other transitions as well. I usually have a sense, and I'm learning to pay attention better, that it's time for something new. And then I just have to be willing to kind of step into the unknown and trust that the answers will reveal itself. Joseph Campbell says, basically, doors will open where there were no doors. And I continue to experience that.
That's really cool. So I've got a lot that I wanted to ask you about the hero's journey. Can we talk about it for a moment?
Yeah, let's go for it.
About the theme and the themes of the hero's journey. So I got interested in helping mid to late career types figure out what's next. Now I'm in and I learned a lot of this at the Halftime Institute. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Halftime Institute. A guy named Bob Buford wrote a book called Halftime many, many years ago. And sort of the three big ideas is you've got to figure out your core, like who you are. You've got to create capacity, and then you got to figure out the context. Well, professionally, I'm in the capacity business. I help people create the means, right? But the meaning is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went to the Halftime Institute, I learned a little bit about this, but Bob Buford introduced us to some of Richard Rohr's work, which I know you quote a lot, and I think you're really involved in some of his work or have been. And of course, his book, Falling Upward, a lot of what you were. And so when you talked about having to go to those dark places to figure things out, that's a step in the hero's journey, I believe. I mean, it's a reality of the hero's journey. Can you kind of walk us through the template of what the hero's journey looks like and how it might be relevant for this audience, which are people who are moving into act 2 of their lives and kind of trying to figure things out, but also just everyday people that, there is a process to find out kind of who you are and what you care about, what you ought to be doing with this one life.
Yeah. So the hero's journey, as I talk about it, it really is. It's a map. It's a tool to help us locate ourselves on our own journey. And the gift of it is to say, in that, it's like, oh, I'm not alone. Like people have traversed this territory before. So Joseph Campbell, the 20th century mythologist, mid 20th century, late 20th century, became more popular because Hollywood really picked up his stuff. But he studied, traditions, religious traditions, cultures across time and place, and he identified this one pattern. He called it the monomyth, this storyline that kind of runs through all our stories, this pattern. And yes, it has been used for advertising and branding and things like that. And sure, that's great. But what I'm really interested in is how can this help us? How can we locate ourselves in this so that we can glean from this universal pattern as we embark on our own unique journey? The way that I articulate it, so Campbell had 3 phases. His are departure, initiation, and return. Okay. And he has something like 17 steps, which is great, but I decided to simplify it. I was coming through this sort of deep, sort of dark night of the soul journey of my own life. And when I started to look back, I was re-engaging Campbell's work, and I was like, that's what I lived. That's what I went
the step
through.
You were in. Yes. You didn't know it at the time.
Yes, exactly. So as I started like reflecting, and this is what ended up turning into my book. I wasn't setting out to write a book right away, but the way that I describe it, the first one is leaving the familiar, falling into the unknown, and rising to wholeness. And within there, I have, sort of 10 different steps. And they might sometimes, even those phases, you might be in 2 phases. In your relational life, you're in one. In your vocational life, you're in another, right? So the point isn't that it's always linear, but that by getting familiar with this pattern, we notice like, oh, when I feel really lost and confused, instead of just saying, I'm lost and confused and I have no idea where I am, we actually can take comfort in the fact like, oh, this is totally normal because, to use your example in terms of some of the work you do, oh, I've left this other career, or I know it's sort of expired. It makes sense that I feel uncertainty. So now what are some practices I can engage in? How can I, slowly move forward, as opposed to what commonly happens, right? I might just leave one thing and jump into something else without any reflection.
Yeah. And oftentimes we don't change or don't choose to change until it's forced upon us.
Yep.
And that's when I guess we're in sort of the dark night of the soul. Something happens in our life where there is no option.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all get cues, and you don't have to define yourself as a religious or even spiritual person. I think so Dr. Lisa Miller, I actually quote her work in my book, but she's a researcher out of Columbia, and she's done research that demonstrates the human brain is wired to make spiritual connections, to find meaning in all sorts of things. And so, I share some stories that might be out there for some people, but I'll tell you, these stories or these signs, these synchronicities, these sacred encounters, these spiritual experiences, they all taught me something or showed me something or helped me heal, and they led me from one place to the next. And so I think it's really important to learn how to pay attention to some of those. And what happens is, and those could be a version of the call to adventure, but if we keep resisting those, right, we resist that sense that, oh, I feel kind of empty, or I'm going through the motions, or I feel kind of numb. The more we resist, I think what ends up happening is the call to adventure gets a lot louder and perhaps eventually becomes a bit more abrasive and really interrupts life as we know it, so that ultimately we can move into what's next.
I mean, my experience in my life is, we get so busy with external influences, influencing us to live a certain way or to do a certain thing or to be on this linear path that I'm supposed to live this life. And then we get incentives. I get rewarded for being a financial advisor that own a small business that, I get attaboys that, kind of feed me. But if I'm not careful, I just start walking around sort of a dead person because I don't feel anything. I'm just doing what the world has influenced me to do. Some of your writing reminded me of a book that John Eldredge wrote many years ago called Waking the Dead. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all.
I've heard of it. Yep.
But in the book, he uses the story from the book The Perfect Storm, which was about the fisherman, that had the tragedy out in the ocean or whatever. And it talked about the Coast Guard guys coming to rescue them. And there's a term they use in the Coast Guard about the victims. When they assess a victim, how alert are they? And one of their terms is, they're alert and aware times 0. And so John Eldredge's analogy is many of us are walking around alert and aware times 0 because we don't take the time or take the space or so what encouragement can you give most of us who are just trying to get through the day to slow down and go to the woods? I mean, I talk about this in my book, and again, I covered a lot of this just about this deep. You went, really deep, and this is your field, and I'm a financial advisor. Yeah. But what can we do to encourage people to go into their, into the woods, if you will, or whatever the metaphorical place they need to go to assess what really matters?
Yeah, I mean, let's go into the woods literally and metaphorically. I love that. So what I would say is, first of all, if you are in this place where you feel like you are the walking dead, it's really important to pay attention and also be kind with yourself, because what can happen is people can feel a certain amount of shame, regret, and those voices can get really loud that we're almost like, it's too late. It's too late for me to go inward. It's too late for me to make a change. It's too late for me to do anything different. This is kind of how I've been. Well, it really isn't. In fact, especially since the research is showing around longevity studies and things like that, people are living a lot longer. So even if you're approaching retirement, odds are you might still have a couple decades left. So in fact, I was just at a gathering this last week with what's called the Modern Elder Academy, which people should check out.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, and there was a man there who was 83, and he's trying to figure out the next chapter of his life. And I was like, that's life goals right there for me. He's still asking the question. But to come back to, what people do if they feel like trying to get their bearings, it really, I know there's a lot out there for wellness and mindfulness and all these things. But don't get caught up in all the noise and feeling like you need to do everything. It's really important that you just start to carve out. I like to call it, talk about microdosing solitude. So find little moments, begin with little moments in your week, but eventually, hopefully you can find little moments. Maybe it's, it's 20 minutes a day to meditate, or it's a reflective journaling practice, or it is a walk in the woods. Start to carve out those times, and you'll get more used to it. You'll feel free. You'll feel like you're starting to heal, and actually your desire for more of that, it will grow. And so alongside of that, one of the practices, and I work with it with all my clients on this one, it's I consider this a practice, but it's subtraction. Take stock of your life. There's always something you can subtract. There's either a hobby, maybe you're golfing a little too often, maybe it has to do with you're in your money too much, or you're in your possessions are keeping you tied down. And so maybe there's something you need to sell. I don't know. So there's all sorts of ways we can subtract. Maybe you can, instead of, sending out a million emails over your lunch hour, maybe you really should take a lunch hour, or maybe go try out a yoga class or something. So start with what you can subtract, and also find those little small spaces in your day. And that's the beginning.
Yeah, that's helpful. So, I know you do coaching sort of the corporate level, but also leadership coaching. So what does that process look like sort of in a big picture, like leadership coaching or
Yep.
executive coaching, or
Yep.
I think that's what I read, that you do
Yes.
that
Yeah.
for
So
work.
I'm not like in-house at places. What I would say is
Okay.
I work with people who are they're in executive roles, or they're in a transition of something, or they're entrepreneurs and they're trying to relocate themselves. So they come to me, they still have their job and whatnot. And by the way,
And that's fraught with, it's fraught with danger. I mean, all of us, especially quote high achievers, they've got the uniform. They've got the persona that they present out to the world, but inside sometimes we feel empty. So these are the people that recognize that and come to you. Is that
yes, exactly.
the idea?
Yeah. And so what's interesting is my own story is one of being very much an achiever, but part of why I sort of how I deceived myself is I was in quote unquote the helping profession. So I wasn't a profession where I'm making tons of money. I'm a pastor. I'm doing nonprofit
Yeah.
work.
And you're supposed to already have a meaning.
Yeah, right. And it's like really virtuous work, looks really good. And so I kind of thought, oh, I'm not playing that game, but I was playing the same game, kind of onward and upward and ambitious. And I was playing it in my own way. And so I can really relate to people who come from, I have people who are from all sorts of successful backgrounds and doing things. And the work we do really is, I appreciate you brought it. Was it Buford? Was that who you brought up?
Bob Buford.
Bob
Yeah.
Buford. My work really would be parallel to the idea of identifying your core. Who are you at the core? I really think that's the place to start in order to discern our purpose. In order to figure out who I really am, which admittedly is actually kind of a mysterious question. And while we might find some terminology and some descriptions of who we are, at the end of the day, it's almost something that we are unable to articulate. But in order to get to that, in order to access that inner quiet, if you will, we do have to remove our masks. We have to acknowledge that there's some way we've been showing up. It's the uniform you're talking about. So I like to talk about it sort of playfully as the mask task, but it's the idea of identifying and removing these limiting identities. And, to bring up the work of Richard Rohr or Bill Plotkin's a big influence on me. We aren't looking to take that mask and just like throw it aside and shame on you and be judgmental about it. Actually, we need to get really close to it, get curious. And what we will find is that mask is really something we developed in our childhood to protect ourselves, and to keep us safe, to get our needs met. And so in a way, we need to, in order to really heal and move on from it, we need to thank it. This is the idea of the loyal soldier. Have you heard this concept? Can I share it? Or?
Yeah, I think Richard Rohr wrote about it, the Japanese ritual.
Yes. Well, so Japanese soldiers in World War II, they were on these deserted islands. And I first heard it from Bill Plotkin. I think that's where Rohr gets it too.
Probably.
But the war was over. The war was over. They did not know, though. So they kept carrying on as if the war was going on. And when they were discovered, instead of the country shaming them, it welcomed them back. And it was like they said, thank you for your service. They honored them. Thank you for your service. But your service is complete. You're no longer needed. And so we need to do this with parts of ourselves that we've outgrown and say, thank you. You actually helped. But now you're hindering me. You're hurting me. And in order for us to move forward into whatever that is, in relationships, in our careers, in just life in general, we need to shed those outdated operating patterns so that we can embrace that fuller, truer version of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, in the book, so tell me, what was the motivation for the book and who is it really for?
So I alluded to this earlier, but I had come through this 5-6 year journey of really shedding my masks and going through the unknown and figuring out who I am and why I'm here and sort of, getting my heart back, as I talked about. And as I was reflecting on it, I started to realize, I think this is actually a book. And a big part of that was in my work. So as a former pastor and someone who likes studying philosophy and spirituality and different things, I've got all these really thick, huge books. Like even Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, like it's pretty dense.
Yeah, it's pretty thick.
Most people aren't going to read that. And also maybe it's also, he's not making those direct connections to our daily life. Like he talks about a little. So I thought, wow, this stuff is just so powerful. And I could see my own life in this pattern. I thought, how could I share this with others to give them a tool that I don't claim as my own? It's something that humans across time and place have, they've identified this pattern. How can I, share this with others? And so really it's for, midlife is in the title. midlife, you could see it as an age range, maybe 35 to 65 or something. And I think it's fine. A lot of people are resonating with people, especially people who are retiring. It's very interesting. But I would say when I think of midlife, and this is really who the book's for more broadly, it's just anyone who's going through any transition, anyone would say, I'm in a liminal space right now. Anyone who senses that the way they've been moving through the world just doesn't work anymore, and there's something out ahead. Now, what has precipitated that awareness for them, I'm not sure. Again, it could be some transition, could be a tragedy, could be discontentment, but it's really for any of those people. So you actually could be 25, and this might be the book that you need to read. You also could be 75.
Yeah, so you just used the term there that I've heard a little bit from Rohr and others. So define liminal space.
Yeah, so liminal space it's the space between. It's really the threshold, but extended. Instead of just the threshold, like, oh, I just stepped through the door.
Yeah,
Liminal space
could be a long one.
Yeah, liminal space is that layover at the airport, between an arrival and another departure. So as applied to our lives, it is these seasons of uncertainty, unknown, and the power of it really, I mean, it has so many gifts to give us. One, we can get clarity about what's next instead of rushing into something. Two, it can help us recharge and gain energy for the task ahead, or for what we're going to be called to do. Liminal space also, I like to think of it as kind of an evasion space, meaning we can escape that former version of ourselves. If we can sit in the unknown long enough, it's really going to enable us to shed those former patterns as opposed to relapsing to them quickly.
Yeah, I know one of the dangers as we make the retirement transition. I don't even like the word retirement, although my industry, that's it's plastered all over my website. Because retirement is what we do to like old airplanes and
Yes.
things that are no longer useful.
Yeah.
So really is a transfer. It is a transformation to a new context, perhaps. But as we make that transition, I think the danger many of us make, including me and clients that I've worked with, is we don't do the work up front before we make the transition, and then we just start saying yes to everything under the sun that we think we should. And before we know it, our second act is no different than the first act.
Yes. Very common.
So to me, that's, the work that you're doing, you're teaching in the book, the work that you're doing with this leadership coaching. You kind of want to do it before you, and I guess if you're in it, it's never too late, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So how would you, when we talk about who you really are, how is that different or similar to the concept of your true self or your soul, or is it something different, or is it sort of the same thing?
Yeah, I think we could like have some nuances in all this, but I think as an introduction, what I like to say to people is, I think all that language is interchangeable. So who you really are, I like to say soul. But one way to think about that, I also soul can be off-putting. So in my work, it's very important, whether it's like a reality out there, God or the divine, or whatever you describe, your internal reality, it's very important. I write this in my book. I'm like, I don't care what you call it. I don't care what you call it, because what I care about is that you pay attention. That's what's important.
Gotcha.
Pay attention. But what I will say as far as like ego or true self, so true self, false self, let's say soul, ego, this journey is really about saying, as you get connected with that truer part of yourself, you're not just discarding your ego. Yes, there might be an ego death of sorts, but ultimately the ego in certain views there's different ways people view it, but it's actually helpful. Like the ego helps us interface with the world. So we identify who we truly are. At the end of the day, though, something still needs to write the emails. Something still needs to get the stuff done.
Yeah.
So the problem is,
you just can't sit on the pillow all day.
Exactly.
And make me sad.
Exactly. Yeah. The problem is in the first half of life, we start to suppress soul, like the deeper part of us, the creativity and the expansiveness and the whatever, all these different things, and we are kind of held hostage by soul at a point. And so the work becomes, how do I release that grip? Soul, hey, or ego, you're going to be okay. We still need you. But your role now is to support, especially in the second half of life, or especially at retirement, is going to support these other sort of dreams and hopes and possibilities that are emerging from within.
Yeah, very cool. So you had, so how many years were you involved in hospice ministry, or I guess you were a chaplain in
Yep.
the hospice area?
Yeah, I'm going to be continuing as a volunteer, so I'm still doing it. But 3 years ago, I started volunteering, and I had
Okay.
a desire for a number of reasons. I think one of the main ones was both through my meditation practice, but also the journey I describe in the book. I say that journey was really, there was sort of a spiritual death that I underwent. And there's something about it that made me feel, I just had to contend with my own mortality. So I want to stay aware of that. I want to stay awake because it helps me live, be more alive, right? I also felt like these are many times people are forgotten. So I started volunteering. That turned into a part-time chaplain role, which I just stepped out of just because I want to give more time to my coaching and writing. I can't do it all, right? This is
Right.
good for me to remember.
Right.
So, but I will say it's really powerful, and I playfully sort of think it should be mandated for everyone when they turn 40.
To go to the
To be,
hospice.
yes, exactly. I think when people turn, all right, it's stunner, right? It's like people, when they turn 40, between 40 and 45, you should have to volunteer in hospice
Yeah.
care, because I think it's a time where you're in midlife. A lot of questions are surfacing. Who am I? And it's a way that it can, give you some perspective. I mean, one of the things, and you may have heard this before, but a former palliative care nurse, Bronnie Ware from Australia, she wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And in her work, what she discovered is the number one regret is, I wish that I had the courage to live a life true to myself.
Wow.
Not the life that others expected of me. So this is, I wish that I lived more according to soul or my true self, not according to my mask or my false self. And by the way, the second was, I wish I hadn't worked so much. So by getting close to those who are dying, I mean, I felt like all the time I was receiving messages and wisdom from them. So that's sort of why I playfully say, hey, this is, midlife, great time to learn from those who are at the end of life.
Yeah, and serve them, obviously. Yeah, I read Kathleen Dowling-Singh wrote a book called The Grace in Dying that had some of the same themes in terms of learning from those and the dying process, essentially, and how we get connected to the divine, however you define the divine again, as you mentioned. So, yeah, so other than the author you quoted as lessons, are there others that you picked up in the 3 years that surprised you or were impactful?
Yeah, well, there's a ton. I mean, what's funny is this is sort of inspired by my teenage daughter, who, I don't know, inspired. Maybe I was trying to keep an eye on her. I got on TikTok and I created an account and I started sharing what I called the secrets of the dying. And it was amazing how many people these things resonated with. And it was very simple. It would be like someone would just say, this one woman's like smoking a cigarette in her wheelchair outside. She's got no teeth. And she just says, I'm learning a lot lately. And I said, yeah, what are you learning? She's like, that God loves everyone, no matter how big or small. And it's just such a profound, simple lesson, but saying, no matter who you are, no matter what you do, no matter how many followers you have, no matter how much money you have, you're loved. So, really this essential wisdom. Or, someone who said, she talked to me, she did this like zipping motion over her mouth, and she's in her 90s, and she said, I'm still learning that I need to keep my big mouth shut. And I just laugh. And then she says, well, you laugh, but this thing has gotten me into a lot of trouble. And I don't know, that's again a very simple lesson. It's something that I think like wisdom traditions teach us about, right? The power of speech. And there she is in this, kind of not the best facility, and she's kind of on her own, and she's passing on this wisdom to me. So many instances just like that. Yeah, it was really special.
Yeah. I know Richard Rohr talks a lot about when we try to move, when you go through the falling and you come out the other side. And of course, life is a whole series of a bunch of S curves,
Yeah.
They're continuous in all these different areas that you mentioned. But he said, I think he wrote something along the lines of, an effective way to find out who you are is to either go through a falling or walk hand in hand with someone who is.
I love that.
I guess if you're in hospice and you're sitting with these people and you're loving on them and talking to them and just being with them, I mean, you don't really even have to say anything, I'm sure. Just the fact that you're with them means a lot to them, I'm certain. because as you mentioned, they're often forgotten.
Yeah.
But the minister gets ministered.
Yeah. It pulls us out of that, the uniform. It pulls us out, it pulls the mask off because we're just invited to be in the moment. You're not trying, it's not like some big meeting where you're trying to close a deal and you're trying to impress someone. You're there with someone who's had everything stripped away.
Yeah.
So I love that quote. I actually haven't heard that from Rich Rohr. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've heard the concept, I'm sure, and I'm not even sure which faith background it's from, but to die before you die.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the idea, I guess. Sounds morbid, but it helps you understand what really matters.
Absolutely.
Those people aren't worried about their Instagram account or where they're going on vacation or who they're impressing with their clothes or whether they had the biggest balance sheet or not. So anyway,
so true.
Just a couple of other final things here. There's a lot we could talk about because I'm really fascinated by what you do and how you have integrated all that you've learned into the way you're serving. So again, you guide groups and individuals in meditation. So, meditation is a word that can be loaded for many of us because we're unfamiliar with it oftentimes. So what are the benefits of meditation and how can we, I've just started doing an intentional practice less than a year ago, and it's been life-changing to me, but it's very small. I'm taking little baby steps using some tools that I learned about. But tell me, what are the benefits for meditation, and how can those of us that aren't familiar with it get a little bit more comfortable with the big idea?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits, we could go on and on. I'll just put them in a few main categories. One would be sort of the physiological benefits in terms of the capacity to unwind or release stress and how that will impact the functioning of your nervous system, which then impacts all sorts of things and reactions in your body that are going on all the time. If you're in fight or flight mode, those can be quieted and your body gets a chance to recover.
And you're healthier.
Yeah, and you're healthier.
Longevity and more energy and all that.
Exactly. So, it's like your blood sugar is spiking because you think there's a constant threat. And so you end up having issues like diabetes because of it's never resetting to normal levels. Or perhaps, your heart rate, your heart's working too hard. So you have heart issues. So it can affect bone density, your skin, all sorts of things. I won't nerd out on all the science, but the other thing is, if that's at the level of the body, it also has a profound effect on the mind, which I will say is when we're talking about calm and being able to access calm and feel just more present and connected. I mean, that's a massive benefit. Instead of being reactive, right, we're able to be responsive and engage a situation appropriately.
And I guess that a neuroplasticity, is that the right term?
Yeah.
Where you actually change your brain.
Yep.
It could actually do that, perhaps.
Yep, absolutely. And then the last, I'd say, just that sense of connecting with your deeper self, right? So that kind of inner journey piece. Now, there's tons of meditation techniques, tons of different practices. There's a ton of free resources out there. So I just say people should start somewhere. It doesn't really matter. But there's sort of three main, these are scientific terms, but areas of meditation. I'll keep it quick, but there's like focused attention meditation styles. There's open monitoring awareness. And then what I teach is in the category of, and this is a mouthful, automatic self-transcending. But this is what I teach is called a being technique. And the main approach is about effortlessness. It's a 20-minute, twice-a-day practice, or if you can start with once. And it really is enjoyable, enables the body to access a deep level of rest, which then leads to all those benefits and many more.
Okay. Well, that's really helpful. Like I said, I'm sort of new to this, and the problem is, my old habits don't die that easily, and so I've got this morning ritual, and I'm bothered if I have to change my ritual, but I need to take some subtraction. Would probably be a good thing, and maybe I should take some of your advice.
Yeah, and I would say that it is a process. It takes time, but also don't be afraid of it. I'm not saying you are. It's just because it's actually something innate. We're doing something that's innate to who we are. It's a tool that just helps us kind of get out of the way so that our body and mind can really access deep rest, repair, and restore themselves so that at the end of the day, that's what I say all the time. I said this in the prison this morning. We're not trying to be good meditators. We're not really concerned about what's going on with our eyes closed. we're more interested in the benefit, like what happens with our eyes open. Are we different? Are we transformed? Or do we love more? Are we spreading more kindness? Like these are the things that really make a good meditator.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the prison a minute. So that's the Within Project. Is that what that's called?
Yeah, correct.
So,
Yep.
Yeah. So that you started that. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what's involved in it.
Yeah. So last year, at the beginning of the year, I got connected with Marquette Law Schools here in Milwaukee, and they have a program of these restorative justice circles, bringing together offenders, victims, judicial officials, law enforcement, community members. And my mom had been actually involved as a volunteer with that. And so she told me about it when I moved back here, and I reached out, and over time, I just started making more connections and eventually got introduced to a prison. And I really felt like while I've seen people, I've worked with different people who are interested in learning meditation, it's kind of amazing how much I put it out there and I talk about it and talk about the benefit. And your everyday person who's got a lot to do, they're like, whatever, I'll get to it later. Well, where was their interest? Where did the doors open? It was in the prisons. Like they're like, we could use this. And so I've now been in 5 facilities. I've done over 12 courses. I do a 4-session course. And the idea is equipping them with a self-sufficient technique. So they don't need me to come in there. They don't need an app. They have what they need. And the one I was at this morning, it's a women's facility. I've taught nearly 80 women there now. And,
Wow.
I've got these sheets where they give me feedback, and it's amazing to hear. Not surprising, but they're noticing the benefit. And the thing is, it's not, as I tell them, especially when I'm in a minimum security facility, which is a few of them, not only are they getting a tool that help stabilize them and help them access calm and in this very difficult environment that is prison, perhaps even more significantly, it's going to be the thing that helps them navigate transition back into the, beyond the walls of the prison, which is such a huge thing. And
you're equipping.
Yeah, and that's really a big impulse of this project as I tell the story to others is I want to, recidivism is insane, like how many people return to prison within 2, 5, 10 years, especially here in the state of Wisconsin. And I already kept one individual. He told me that meditation kept him from getting in a physical altercation, which he said would have extended his sentence. So state of Wisconsin, I've already saved you money. They're not paying me. I'm raising funds to do this. But I really want to help people once they get out, and this will really help them.
Oh, fantastic. That is super, super cool. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to chat about or anything you wish I'd ask? Is there anything on your heart that you'd like a broader audience to know or about you? Or
what's been on my mind lately is the idea of abundance, and because of the spaces I've been in, I've often kind of put it in the background is like financial abundance. It's not we've always had enough and we get by and we've been taken care of and we feel like we've experienced miracles, and so I feel very comfortable with the idea of abundance, of relationship, of time, of energy, of connection, like all sorts of things. And I'm just on a path of saying, I've told you I have done all these different things, but it's saying, okay, there's another one too there for me and my family. So I'm just, sharing kind of personally where I'm at. But I also want to encourage people who are maybe in your realm, who are maybe used to another type of abundance, any of those, to make sure they're opening themselves up to, see that while they may have, say, financial abundance, just as important is opening themselves up to and receiving and passing on all these other forms of abundance.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So let's get the audience connected to you. How can they find out more about you, your organizations, your newsletter, and learn more about your work and support your work if they're so called?
Yeah, thank you so much. So go to benjamincott.com. Or this will also get you there, thewayhomebook.com. That'll get you to the book page on my website, and you can get into the meditation coaching. There's some revamping happening on the website, so be patient. I also have a Substack, which is currently called Still. That may change soon, but you can search for Ben Katt on Substack. And then lastly, withinproject.org. That's for the nonprofit prison work. Also on social media and things like that.
That is a 501c3?
Yeah, I'm fiscally sponsored by a fabulous nonprofit called Social Good Fund, who what they do is they sponsor all these different projects. So yeah, any gift is fully tax deductible.
So if we check it out on that website, we can find ways to support it.
Yeah, there's a give. You can give right on that site there. Yeah, and it's really I count it an honor to be able to go into that setting and use my gifts and what I'm passionate about and share that. But I also so I see it as a communal endeavor. Even though I might be the only one going in, I need the help of others to make that happen. So yeah, of course, if anyone wants to learn more, you can feel free to reach out to me about it. Yeah.
Now, do you have any social media addresses, or do you? That stuff.
AKA Ben Katt. That's Katt at the end. That's my Instagram and this sort of stagnant TikTok account that I have. Okay. If you want to see some secrets of the dying. Okay. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well, which is great.
You're not a secret. Easy to find.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're easy to find. And we'll put all that in the show notes too.
Great. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben. It's really been awesome to have you on. I knew this was going to be really insightful and right up the alley with sort of the theme of the show. I mean, half of these shows are about helping people figure out the core and the context, and about half of them are wealth management. We do tax planning and investment planning and all those kind of things. And I think that it's easy to forget about the heart issues. It is a head and a heart journey to live a fulfilling, meaningful life, and we do want to tend to both really, really well. And you've helped us do that. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I sure enjoyed the conversation. You can check the show out at all the streaming platforms. You can also email me if you want at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com. If you like the show, please give us a rating. Tell us what you think. Share it. And then you can check me out also on our corporate website at tandemgrowth.com. And like I always say, I sort of steal a little bit from Howard Thurman's quote and go find what makes your heart come alive and put the plans in place to pursue it. So take care. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to help you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or comments on the show, feel free to reach out to us at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com, or you can find us on the web at www.tandemgrowth.com. Jeff Bernier is the President and Chief Investment Officer at Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This show is a production of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC. All information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as specific financial, legal, or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Listeners should not rely on the content of this podcast as the basis for any investment decisions. A professional advisor should be consulted and/or independent due diligence should be conducted before implementing anything discussed in this show. While information presented is believed to be factual and up-to-date, Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not make any representations or warranties as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party, such as guests on the podcast, and takes no responsibility for the same.